Okay, very top of Ayin and Aleph. So, how much of a burden has to be assumed by the investor in order for the investment not to be considered to be ribis? So we said that if the depreciation is absorbed by the investor, then that could be good enough according to the Masnisa, according to the Brisa that we quoted. That could be good enough even if there is an assumption of liability by the one who is receiving the item, who's paying rent for the item, in the event that the item should break. Like if it's a boat, if the boat should fall apart, so they take responsibility, but they don't take responsibility for the depreciation of the boat when it's returned, and that they say that even though they're paying rent, that's okay. The Nagu B'nai Kufra, so those who had boats were called B'nai Kufra because they put kofir, they put pitch on the boats in order to secure the boats. So they had a minhag of agua b'shas mashicha, that they would get paid rent when the one who rented the boat would rent it. Paga b'shas shavira, but if the boat should break, then they would get paid at the value of the boat. So atav minhag, so that was the minhag. So we say atav minhag, tell you Milsa. Do you think it's dependent upon minhag? Minhag is osios gehinim. Sometimes if they're doing an isser, so who cares if that's their minhag? So we say no. Shum de Masnisa, because of the fact that the price has said it's okay, as long as the one who's renting it is not responsible to reimburse for depreciation. So then, since the depreciation is being absorbed by the owner of the boat, it's not a ribis problem. Therefore, Tayyim Minaga. So, because therefore they have Mishum de Masnisa Tanya Minhaga. So therefore, they called it a minhag. So Amar, it was a legitimate minhag based upon the brisa. So Amar Rav Anan, Amar Shmuel, Maos Yashel Yisomim. So Rav Anan said in the name of Shmuel, but really he learned it from something Shmuel did. Maos Yisomim Mutal Avosim Beribis. If it's money that belongs to orphans, you're allowed to lend it out for ribis because the orphans need to make a living, or they need to survive. So therefore, it's okay to bypass the ribis prohibition for orphans. What? Doesn't everyone need to survive? That doesn't sound right. Amalei Rav Nachman Mishum Diyasmininu, because they're orphans. Safina lahu yisura. Therefore, we feed them prohibitions. If it's asa for everybody else, it's asa for the Yisomim too. Yasmin the achli the lavdi too. Lisu basu shavkayo. If the Yisomim are getting money, they're receiving things that don't belong to them. So then they should be buried in the same grave as their ancestors and let them die too. So Amalei, Amali, so it didn't pull any punches there. So Amalei, Amali, Izu Gufa de Uvda Hechihava. So Rav Nachman said, it can't be right what you're saying, Rav Anan. Tell me exactly how you learned this thing from Shmuel. So Amalei said, well, how Duda at the Bnei Bar Ukva, there was a cauldron that belonged to the children of Mar Ukva. Ukva had died, and these were his children, Davabe Mar Shmuel, and Shmuel was taking care of them. Takel v'yayvle, takel v'shakele. So he used to rent it out, this cauldron, to people who wanted to use it. He would charge rent for it. And when he discovered that the cauldron had somehow lost some of its weight because the copper had gotten eroded, so he would charge them for the loss of weight. So therefore, he was shakel agua, shakel pischa, shakel piksa. He received rent on their behalf, and also the depreciation. Here's a case where the renters were actually responsible for the depreciation, the loss of the weight. So agua lo pixa, he pixa lo agua. So it can't work if you're going to avoid ribis. You're going to charge rent. So then you can't make the renter responsible for depreciation. And if they're going to be responsible for depreciation, you can't charge rent. So Amalek, Yihab. So Shmuel, Nachman said, no, you don't understand. That's what Shmuel did. That's no problem at all. What do you mean it's no problem at all? Sounds pretty bad to me. He says, no, Kiha Pila with the Kanani, Nami Shari, the Mabud. We would have allowed even older. The Kanani means those who have a takan, they have a sakan, they have a beard. Even the bearded orphans who are not given special treatment because they're already adults would be allowed to do such a thing. Everybody could do that because as far as the depreciation in terms of the copper getting worn out, so that cost was not being absorbed by the renters. Just the loss of weight, no big deal. if the nechoshes got worn out, so that depreciation the renters didn't pay for it. The kam the mikli nechasha batzir dame. Because with the common the mikli nechasha, the more in which you burn things, you're going to heat up water, whatever you're heating up in the cauldron. It's going to cause the nechoshes to get rubbed out, the copper to get rubbed out, and then it's going to be worth less in terms of depreciation. That depreciation the renters were not paying for, so therefore that would be sufficient for it not to be considered a ribis transaction. Amar Rabba bar Sheila Rav Chisda, Amar Rabba bar Yosef bar Chama, Amar Rav Sheshes. However, once we're on the subject of Moshe Yisomim, we do allow certain types of ribis to Rabbanan to be conducted with respect to Moshe Yisomim. And this is the principle that whenever you have, this has been expanded, that whenever you have Moshe Tzedakah, whenever it's like a tzedakah institution, a shul or something like that, we do allow ribis to Rabbanan. So there's a little bit more leeway. So one example of ribis to Rabbanan, the one that the Gemara gives is, Moshe Yisomim Mutala Habos and Kav the Skavarachak the Hefsid. Allowed to loan it out so that if there'll be a loss with the money, a loss in the investment, so then the principal would still need to be repaid. But if there would be a profit, so then the profit would be shared between the one who received the money and the one who invested the money. If the money that we're talking about is for Yisomim, so the Yisomim can only win and they can't lose. But because the profit is not guaranteed, therefore it's not ribis de araisa, it's only ribis de rabbanan. So Tana Rabbanan, Karav l'schar rokak lehefseid. As a general rule, if you're not dealing with Yisomim, the person is going to loan out his money where he can only share in the profits, but he's not going to share in the losses. You know what we call such a person under normal circumstances? A Russia. It's a Russia. Person loans out his money where he can only share in the losses, but he's going to allow the person who received the money to receive all of the profit. That's what we call a chassid. He's a good guy. But if they're going to share the profits and share the losses, zuhi midas kol adam. So that's the proper way in which you do an iska. Obviously, you give a dinar or so to the person who's managing the investment. So Amalei Rabbi Rav Yosef, Hani Zuzi Diyasmi, Heichi Abdinan Lahu. So Rabbi asked Rav Yosef, as a practical matter, if you have somim to take care of, and there are assets that they have, so how do we manage their assets? So Amalei, so Rav Yosef said, well, we set up a whole system with the Bezdin. Muspina Lahu Bezdina, Yavina Lahu Zuza. And the Bezdin simply takes all of their money to make sure that they're not going to waste their money by spending imprudently, and they give them $1 at a time, $1 to buy a bagel in the morning, $1 to buy yogurt in the afternoon, $1 at a time. So that didn't sound so good to Rabbi. He said, Amalei, you're going to give $1 at a time. Pretty soon you're going to run out of all the dollars. Amalei, it's going to run out. So the principal will run out. So Amalei, Mar Hechi Abu. So he said, okay, so if that's the case, so you tell me, Rabbi, how you would do it. So Amalei, well, this is how we do it in my town. By Kinan Gava, the Islay Dava Pericha, you find somebody, a wealthy man in the community who can be trusted because he has pieces of gold. He has pieces of gold, so then we know that he is good for his credit. And I'm going to simply read the simple meaning of the words. There are different girsos here. But we'll go with the simple reading. And we take as collateral, we take gold from this person so that we know that if he is not, if he's going to fall through in terms of returning the money, we can at least hold on to the gold collateral that we have. And then we give out the assets of the Yisomim to this person to invest. In a fashion in which he guarantees the principal, but he says he's going to share the profits. And if something should go wrong and he's not even going to return the principal, he's holding on to his gold collateral. About Dover, Mesuyam, low. However, if it's not pieces of gold, but it is just some sort of other valuable item, then we're worried that we can't trust that this is somebody who really is a good investor, because maybe he's just holding on to somebody else's valuable item. But if it's gold pieces, usually if a person has gold pieces, that means that they're good as gold, that they are a wealthy person who's done well in business. Otherwise, maybe it's just a deposit somebody left with him. And then the person to whom it belongs to will give the simanim, he'll take it away, and then it's not even going to be good collateral because it really belongs to somebody else. So Amar Abashi, So Rashi says that's all fine and good. If you find your golden boy in town who has golden pieces and whose credit is as good as gold, and that you can trust them, that you're going to give them investments and they're going to make money for the assessment. But what if you don't have Mr. Golden Man in the community? Does that mean that we can't trust anybody with the money of the assessment? And then we're going to have to end up losing out the money, and the assessment are not going to be supported. Elam Ravashi, rather Ravashi said, no, if you don't find the man with the golden pieces, then Chazin and Gave Demeshku Nechse. You find somebody who has a smooth credit record, where there are no complaints, there are no grievances, there are no court cases against this person. He seems to be well settled, and he has a good name in the community. Or Mehemen, he's somebody who's considered to be reliable. Mishama Dina Daraisa, and he's somebody who keeps halacha. Some don't have the word deraisa, but somebody who has a good record of listening to whatever the Bezdin tells him to do. Lo mekabel shamta derabanan, and he's not somebody who's ever been placed in chayrim, who's never had a seirav issued against him by the Bezdin. Yeah, it's kind of hard to find people like that. And then you have an agreement and an arrangement which is taken care of in front of the Bezdin. Everybody comes into the Bezdin, and it's worked out that the money of the Yisomim will be given over to this individual. He takes it upon himself that he'll only split the profits, and he's not going to split any losses. In the event that there are losses, he will incur the losses upon himself. And the reason, says Rashi, you have to do an investment is also...
Is he going to be the executor?
He'll be, I don't know if I call him an executor, he'd be an investor, a court-appointed investor on behalf of the Yisomim. Let's call it that. Let's put it that way. Okay. And Bezdin, the reason it's done in front of Bezdin, because Bezdin can be mafkir. They can say, really, as far as this person is concerned, he is really entitled to insist on sharing the losses with the Yisomim, but we're going to be mafkir his property as far as the Yisomim are concerned, to say that we're going to require him to absorb any loss that occurs. This brings us to the next Amen, Daf Ayin Amud Beis. Look at that.
Amen. So he's fiduciary.
He's a trusted fiduciary who's investing on behalf of the Yisomim, and he is absorbing all responsibility if anything should go wrong with the investment. Okay, now he's investing, but he's going to. Yeah. His payment, so to speak, his payment will be that if there are profits, so then he'll share in the profits. If there are no profits, then he gets no payment. Now, next Mishnah. Ayin Amud Beis, Ein Mekablin Son Barzim Yisrael. You're not allowed, because this is considered to be a ribis type of investment. Okay, Karav L'skara Rochok Mehefsed. You're not allowed to accept iron sheep from a Jew. What that means is that whether you're receiving actual sheep or some other investment, the person who receives the funds is responsible for any losses, but if they're profits, they're going to share the profits. It's similar to the arrangement that we do allow with Yisomim. Neshu ribis, so we consider to be that's a form of ribis. It's called iron sheep, because whatever the sheep are worth, when they're given over, we evaluate what that amount is, and we say that the recipient is obligated to pay back that amount, regardless of what happens to the sheep or whatever the commodity happens to be. About Mekablin Son Barzim in Akum. With this type of arrangement, you're allowed to have with a non-Jew, because ribis is permitted vis-a-vis a non-Jew. Below me, you can borrow from a non-Jew with ribis. You could lend to a non-Jew with ribis. No problem. Money lending, it was always a major source of income for the Jews, particularly in the Middle Ages. Same thing, even if the person's not a pagan, but there's still a non-Jew who accepted upon himself the 7 mitzvos of B'nai Noach, but he's still a non-Jew. A Jew is also allowed to lend out money of a non-Jew as long as it belongs to the non-Jew, but not if the Jew is suspiciously involved in the transaction. And the Gemara is going to spell out exactly what that means. Gemara. Lemema de Bershusa, okay. Lemema de Bershusa de Mekabel Kaima. You mean to say whenever there's a ribis problem means that the recipient is absorbing all of the responsibility. Like we said in the previous stop, that the one who's paying for the money is absorbing, that he's going, the one who's receiving the item is going to absorb all of the depreciation costs. Plus, he has to pay a premium over returning the item or its value. So that's ribis. So if we're going to say it's a ribis problem, so we're assuming that the recipient is assuming all the responsibility of a minu, but we find that it says elsewhere otherwise. If you receive such tzon barzil arrangement, the non-Jew gives over, let's say, some sheep, and now the Jew who receives it is going to breed the sheep and fatten the sheep, and also see to it that the children are going to grow and be taken care of. And at a certain point, they're going to split the profits, the children, and so the brood that's been given birth to, it's all going to be split. So we say that the children that are born are not considered to be in the possession of the Jew who's receiving the tzon barzel, but are considered to be in the possession of the non-Jew, at least to some degree, so that they're patur min bechorah, that they would be exempt from having to be given to a Kohen if you had a firstborn male child born to any of the behemoths. So Amar Abaye, so that would only be true if the one who originally owned the sheep still bore some responsibility for them. Otherwise, he wouldn't have an ownership interest in the sheep. So Amar Abaye lokasha had the unsa v'zula. So he says, no, it depends. If the one who's giving over the sheep is still accepting responsibility for any depreciation or for any accident that occurs, so then it's still considered to be his domain. Our Mishnah that says that it's ribis is hadlo kabila unsa v'zula, is when all the responsibility is being borne by the recipient, and the one who's investing the sheep is not taking any responsibility for accidents or depreciation. So Amle Rava either kabila mara unsa v'zula. If the case that is described in the Brisa that we just stated, where the non-Jew is giving it over and these blooddos are going to be paturim min bechorah, is when the non-Jew accepted upon himself any accidents or loss costs. Son barzel karislev. We wouldn't call that son barzel. Son barzel means it's iron sheep, that it is as hard as iron for the recipient, that he has full-fledged responsibility. Behold, Aditani Sefer, and also if we're going to split hairs in this fashion, so the Sefer of our Mishnah should have distinguished in a different fashion. Instead of saying that it's okay, the only time that it's okay to do a tzon barzel transaction, if you're going to call such an arrangement a tzon barzel, is when you're getting it from a non-Jew. You can have such a tzon barzel transaction from a Jew as well. If the Jew is going to assume the responsibility, meaning the Jewish owner of the sheep, investor, is going to assume responsibility for unsa v'zula. Liflog b'didei, you could say in our Mishnah. But man, when is it asa b'medrim amurim? Jelo kabila mara, when the owner of the sheep does not accept upon himself unsa v'zula, accident costs and depreciation costs. About kabil mara, but if the owner of the sheep is giving it over to be managed, accepts upon himself unsa accident costs, v'zula and depreciation costs, shapidami, that would be fine. Why do you have to run to the case of an akum? Ella amarava. Rather, Rava said, when I say tzon barzel, the word tzon barzel means that the one who is receiving the sheep is assuming full responsibility. If that's the case, so then why is it if a tzon barzel is only when the recipient is taking upon himself full responsibility, why then wouldn't the animals be considered to be in his domain at that point in time? And any animal that would be born to them, who would be a firstborn animal, should be given to the Kohen. Why then is it considered like the Nachri still has his hand in the mix of the animals? I'll tell you the reason. The reason is, Hainu Tam, the Belados Pturim in Mechora, the reason the Belados are exempt from Bechora, it's Kevim, Tiloya Ibzuzi, is because these animals are still designated as a collateral for the non-Jew to take upon himself in the event that this Jew who took upon himself the full responsibility for anything that happens, if he doesn't give the money, let's say the animals die and he owes not die, but let's say that he's not going to give his share in the profits of any animals that were sold and so forth. So to the extent that there are any blooders around from this arrangement, so the non-Jew is going to take them into his possession as payment for the amounts that are owed to him by the Jewish manager. The Nachri is going to come along and he's going to take whatever behemoths are still left in the flock, below Mishkach Lala Behema, and if he doesn't take the original behemoths, he's going to take the children that were born from the original behemoths. So therefore, at least as far as these animals are being designated as collateral, for the arrangement, it's considered like the Nachri still has his hand in them. And there's a special din when it comes to Bechorah, that whenever there's a Nachri who has his hand in these animals, even as them being designated collateral, the animal is patum in a Bechorah. But really, in essence, the reason why there would be a ribbis problem if the one who gave over the animals was a Jew is because the recipient is bearing full responsibility, including accident costs and including depreciation costs. Because ribbis really only applies when the item is considered to have gone over to the possession of the recipient. If the item is still considered to be in the possession of the owner because he's still bearing a significant amount of responsibility, because that's when we do not apply the laws of ribbis. This is a very important foundational principle in terms of understanding why ribbis in a loan is prohibited and why you can rent an item, why you're receiving the item back plus the rental cost. Why is it that you're allowed to do that and it's not ribbis? Because it still belongs to the owner because he's still assuming depreciation costs and accident costs and the like. So remember this, it's a very important principle. So we have a pasuk here that talks about a person who receives gains through ribbis. It's a bad thing. It's going to go to those who have compassion for poor people. What does this mean? Different interpretations of what the pasuk in Mishlei means. Amarav to go in Shavur Malka. It's a reference to Shavur Malka. Who is Shavur Malka? He was the king of Persia, and he used to take money away from the Jewish people, and he would give over the money to the Dalim, to the non-Jews. Well, the non-Jews, why are they called Dalim? Because they don't observe any mitzvahs, so they're poor for mitzvahs, and he would give over the money. He was like, I don't know, some perverted version of Robin Hood. So Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Lihuna, Lo Nitzvacha. So Rav Nachman said, no, you want to know, I'll tell you what the pasuk's really referring to. Lo Nitzvacha ela da'afilu ribis ta'ovik kochavim. What it means is that even if you're taking ribbis from a non-Jew, which is something that technically speaking, you would think that it would be mutter, nonetheless, the person is going to lose all of his money, even though he thought that this is something that would be permissible. It's Yori the Tzimayon, he's going to lose all of his money. It's all going to be collected up, despite the fact that he thought that it's okay since he's taking it from a non-Jew. So Esrei, Rabbi Nachman, so Rabbi says, I don't understand. What's wrong with taking ribbis from a non-Jew? It says in the pasuk specifically, Lanachri Sashich. You're allowed to loan money with ribbis to a non-Jew. So he says, no, my sashich, lav sashuch. When it says the word sashich, doesn't that mean sashuch? That you're going not to pay ribbis, but you're going to charge ribbis from a non-Jew. That's the implication of sashuch. So Rav Nachman says, no. When it says lo sashich, it means don't pay interest to a non-Jew. No, it means sashich. So I mean, I need the Torah to tell me, don't pay interest to a non-Jew. I'm sorry. I need that not that you collect money from a non-Jew, but sashich that you should pay money. You should pay money of ribbis to a non-Jew. So they say sashich, so pay him ribbis. So I mean, I thought the Torah is telling me I can collect ribbis from him sashuch. So now you're telling me the Torah is telling me sashich, I should pay ribbis to a non-Jew. Lo sagi delav hachi. That I need to tell the Torah to tell me, go out of your way to pay interest to a non-Jew, even if it's permissible. Why would the Torah tell me specifically, make sure to pay ribbis to a non-Jew? So he says, no, it's to teach me sort of the negative. To say you can pay interest to a non-Jew, but don't pay interest to your fellow Jew. So that you can't to pay interest to your fellow Jew. What do you mean behedi? It says explicitly that you're not allowed to pay interest to your fellow Jew. It says it says do not so don't pay interest to your fellow Jew. So no, so the reason it says is because any kind of essay is considered to be an essay. So now it says teaches me that I also violate a positive commandment in the event that I should pay interest to a Jew. And in addition to the negative commandments that I'm not allowed to, that there's a prohibition against paying interest to a Jew. But I don't have a pasuk that tells me explicitly that I'm allowed to charge interest to a non-Jew. What do you mean? That can't be. We ask another kasha in that principle that somehow you're going to tell me it's usher to charge interest to a non-Jew. It says in our Mishnah you could do so. It says, you could borrow money from them with interest and pay them. You're allowed to loan money to a non-Jew beribis and collect ribis from the non-Jew. It says so in our Mishnah. So no. Our Mishnah doesn't mean that it's a carte blanche that it's a carte blanche dispensation. It only means to the extent that you need to charge interest in order to make a living. So nowadays we assume you need to charge interest in order to make a living. So we hold that it's mutter. There are no obstacles or limitations to the amount in which we allow nowadays to charge money to a non-Jew. But says the Gemara, technically speaking, it's only the amount that you need in order to subsist. Ravina says, no, when we allow it, we only allow it with Tamanei Chachamim. Tamanei Chachamim Maskin. In time of my Gozu Rabbanim, why would there have been a Gezerah Rabbanim not to loan money even to a non-Jew with interest? Shema Yilma Mimasav. You're going to transact business from him. Maybe you'll learn from him, and you'll learn, I'm engaged in this transaction with ribis to a non-Jew. I'll charge ribis to a Jew. It came into Tamachakamu, but since he's a Tamachakam, Lo Yilma Mimasav, he won't learn from his way. So therefore, the dispensation of our Mishnah, the contention of the Gemara of Rav Nachman, is that it is limited either to the amount that you need in order to make a living, or only to Talmidei Chachamim. Stop it. A good coach. I don't. Okay, I don't know. Okay, I don't know what. Oh, here we go. End. Okay.